The government censorship, which I'm shocked they're trying to do it with us, probably with this episode too. What do you know? What are you going to talk to us about? Let us know.
Yeah, so this idea started with the interview that Tucker Carlson did with this guy named Mike Benz the other day, and extremely interesting interview. I'd recommend anybody watches it. So it was an hour long, and yeah, it was mind blowing everything he said. But the basic premise of it ties into what was called the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948, which so the reason this act came about is because after World War II, there was a worldwide rule where they're like, all right, we're not going to take over countries by brute force anymore. We're going to do it through media and through propaganda and through like proxy wars by like arming rebels and whatnot. So the CIA had a lot of fun doing that. Very successful for a while, but part of this was that the act was developed to regulate broadcasting programs for foreign audiences produced under the guidance by the State Department, and it prohibited domestic disseminations of material produced by such programs as one of its provisions. But in 2012, that was changed. Obama repealed this act and allowed for materials produced by the State Department Broadcasting Board of Governors to be made available within the United States. So translation, that meant that before he repealed this, we could use propaganda on like the international world, but not domestically. But now we can use the propaganda against the domestic audience. And the reason for this is because the government was really intertwined with the media companies before this, but like social media kind of took it by surprise.
They just weren't ready for the internet. 2016 was really the first time that social media had reached such maturity that it began to eclipse legacy media.
And then in like 2013 timeline, they started having like social media accounts that had more influence than, you know, the mainstream media.
And in that initial period of social media, nobody was getting subscriberships at the level where they actually competed with legacy news media. They never reached 30 million followers. They never reached, you know, a billion impressions a year type thing. As a uncensored, mature ecosystem allowed citizen journalists and independent voices to be able to outcompete legacy news media, this induced a massive crisis both in our military and in our State Department and intelligence services.
Crazy things that this guy said is that NBC, ABC, and CBS were all created by Office of War Information Veterans like right after World War II. So all these like establishment media companies are created by people that were involved with the government, had like direct backdoor relationships with the government. You know, the CIA has documents saying that they had a relationship with the New York Times, Washington Post. Rupert Murdoch received grants from an NGO called the National Endowment for Democracy.
Our mainstream media is not in any shape or form, even from its outset, independent from the national security state, from the State Department, from the War Department. You know, you had the initial, all of the initial broadcast news companies, NBC, ABC, and CBS, were all created by Office of War Information Veterans from the War Department's effort in World War II. You had these Operation Mockingbird relationships from the 1950s through the 1970s. Those continued through the use of the National Endowment for Democracy and the privatization of intelligence capacities in the 1980s under Reagan. There's all sorts of CIA reading room memos you can read even on CIA.gov about those continued media relations throughout the 1990s. And so you always had this backdoor relationship between the Washington Post, the New York Times, and all of the major broadcast media corporations. And by the way, you know, Rupert Murdoch and Fox are part of this as well. You know, Rupert Murdoch was actually part of the National Endowment for Democracy coalition.
Benz said, quote, the COVID and the 2020 election were the most censored events in human history based on like data that he collected.
Holy
so
shit.
yeah. And then he wanted to talk about Elon Musk, which is he said that he's not under a lot of pressure from the government, but he's in a unique position where the government's actually dependent on him for their green energy push, their military development, things like telecom and SpaceX. So they are trying to delicately do like a death by 1,000 paper cuts thing. Like, so they went from subsidizing everything he did, giving him all these grants. Now he's got all these investigations against him. So they're trying to like whittle away at his influence. And last thing, in the EU did this thing called the EU Digital Service Act, which kind of ties into what that guy was speaking to us about the other day. So they gave him the choice of either complying with the censorship measures they wanted to implement on the European Union or losing the European Union as a base for customers. So he had to comply with what they wanted to do. But so that's where we're at now.
So, but Brandon, here's my thing. Do you think that censorship and that control, how much do you think it's going to play a part in this upcoming election?
Well, basically, there's never been a time in modern history where we've had technology where the government wasn't heavily shaping what was allowed to pass through the media. You know, so like they were from the origin of the major news companies, they were heavily involved in that, like newspapers, like mainstream media, TV, radio, all involved in that, and they got involved in social media platforms right away. So yeah, I think they'll be involved. They've always been involved, and they even said that I think it was either the CIA or Homeland Security developed like this machine learning AI where it's called NLP, where it like groups and categorizes people into like certain subsets based on the things they say. So you know, people that like speak a certain way on social media will be like classified as like, oh, you know, like extreme Trump like people,
Jeez.
like somewhat Trump people, like far left.
Before we close,
Yeah.
like, because I like to bring problems into the table and solutions, and this is up to you that are watching this right now.
Yeah.
Like, the only way to beat the algorithm is by humans.
Yes.
It's by human interaction. You're watching this right now. You
Talk
like
to
what
them.
we're saying, subscribe, share with a friend, talk to someone about this show, because like that's the only way to beat the algorithm.
I love
is to
it.
do human things.
Do human?
Yeah.
I love that you said that, bro.
Yes,
Human
it's-
interaction.
The essence of all this is that the government's always been terrified of us being able to communicate and like push ideas out. They've always been deeply involved in shaping that, and it terrifies them to lose control of that.
I think so. You're 100%. I agree.